Hey guys, what's going on? Shah here, and today I have jumped onto PTR to kind of talk about the new talent changes that are going to be coming live in a few weeks here when the PTR isn't the PTR anymore and becomes the pre-patch or pre-patch event, I guess, for Shadowlands. And going forward into Shadowlands, what the talent tree is going to look like for Guardian Druids, and kind of hint a little bit at what the meta might be like, at least in the coming to the end of this expansion and going into the next. From total speculation, kind of what I've seen on the PTR and on the beta so far. So the big changes that we're going to see are in the 25, 30, and 35 talent row. Most of these dealt with CC, so we need to kind of look at what we're working with and what changes we're going to have to make to our rotation, to what we have like accessible in our toolkit as well, and how we're going to handle some different pulls. So the first big change will happen in the 25 talent row with Ursol's Vortex being completely removed. Now, when I say completely removed, I'm definitely kidding because it was added to the Resto Affinity, which you're going to see on the 30 talent row, but we're going to come to that in a second. What was replaced with was Renewal. So Renewal replaced Ursol's Vortex, which I think is a good change. I think this gives Guardian Druids access to an on-demand, off-the-global heal that they can use to help catch themselves back up to the fact that they have no mitigation going into a pull, and to help their healer catch up when they don't have any frenzy charges left. So I think Renewal is a good change. Tiger's Dash, Wild Charge, mainly mobility things normally seen outside of Mythic Plus. Wild Charge is more or less of a flavor choice, but most Guardian Druids will be running, well, we're running Ursol's Vortex, and I think Renewal is a good replacement for that. While they can't kite as easily anymore, they're able now to chuck out a Renewal on themselves every minute and a half, every 90 seconds to help them catch up. Now, if the cooldown was a lot shorter, that'd be cooler, but 1.5, this is kind of a standard what Renewal has always been in the past, in the present, and now going into the future. So the big changes was in the 30 talent row. So Typhoon and Ursol's Vortex were both removed from the 35 and 25. So you're not going to see Typhoon in here. You're going to see Heart of the Wild. We'll talk about in a second. So it was now added to the Balance Affinity. So if you take Balance Affinity, you have access to the Typhoon. If you take Resto Affinity, you have access to Ursol's Vortex. So we can no longer do some like cool pseudo mass grip style, throw it on Ursol's, Typhoon them, grip them up. So because of that, we kind of have to pick or choose. I think the Balance Affinity, I think for the rest of BFA will probably not be the choice. I don't think Typhoon was good enough to be justified taking it, losing the Ysera's Gift healing you had from the Resto Affinity, along with having the off heals for like Swift Mends and Wild Growths and Rejuvenations, of course. So I think Resto Affinity will still be the meta, but I think going into Shadowlands with some of the new legendaries that are coming out, I think Balance Affinity can actually put up a strong argument against Resto Affinity. Especially with the addition of Renewal, we have a little bit more healing outside of that. Frenzied Regen had a change with both the addition of Berserk plus Incarnation, having it have a reduced cooldown during those windows, which I gotta bring it back. I keep getting ahead of myself. I think this could be a good choice in going into Shadowlands later down the road into Keys. So those are the big changes from the ripping Ursol's and Typhoon out and adding them to the affinities. I don't think Feral Affinity will be taken anymore. We now have access to Maim with Feral Affinity, a single target stun, but outside of like raid encounters, maybe, I don't think Feral Affinity will really be taken. So the next big, and then the last change, of course, like I already mentioned, Typhoon was removed. Heart of the Wild was added. So what this does is it amplifies your affinity that you've chosen, basically increasing your healing or damage done by 30%, and also interacting with a few key components of that affinity. So for Resto Affinity, for example, if you take Resto Affinity and take Heart of the Wild, your mana costs are reduced by 50, and then plus you see the 30% increased healing. So you have 30% increased healing and mana costs reduced, so which means you can pump out more heals over a longer period of time during that 45-second cooldown window, or I guess 45% or 45-second uptime. Sorry, 5-minute cooldown. So it's a pretty lengthy cooldown. I can't imagine this being taken in Keys. You can probably use it once or twice in a raid fight. I think in raid though, you'll probably see more people take Feral or damage or Balance Affinity for a little bit more damage. Like I said, with Balance Affinity or Feral Affinity, your damage is going to be increased by 30%, and it's going to act like it does if you were a Feral Druid. So your critical strikes will then generate an additional combo point, just like it works with Feral Druid. And then again with Balance Affinity, it's 30% increased damage plus Star Surge being instant. So it's going to work very similar to how it would if you were normally playing those specs. So it's a pretty cool addition. I like this a lot. Unfortunately though, because of the way that Mythic Plus works and your uptime that you have to be in, bear form, it's going to limit you probably to Mighty Bash or Mass Entanglement. Because of how many classes have stuns already, I think this just throws onto the DR list, which I'm not a huge fan of. It's a good interrupt. It's a 4-second stun. It's strong, but because of other classes having access to either AoE stuns or a lot more stuns, Depending on your composition, this might not be used as much. And mass entanglement can be used to help stop patrols from, you know, padding around. But honestly, we already had entangling roots for that. Just now we can do it in bear form. So I'm not sure which one would be the play out of these two. I think it depends on your composition. I think it depends on dungeon. But essentially, I don't think Heart of the Wild will be used in most circumstances. And the only time I can see Heart of the Wild being used is like Temple of Sithralis style, like last boss, where like there's just this period where you need additional healing from your group, and a Guardian Druid being able to pump out Heart of the Wild Resto Affinity would be really, really, really strong. But then again, I can't think of another time where like you can go into Heart of the Wild during a Resto Affinity during a dungeon where you probably should be doing your job and tanking the mobs, that Heart of the Wild is going to be useful or impactful at all. So there's arguments for Heart of the Wild for keys, but I can't see it being super, super, super practical, especially after playing through a good amount of the dungeons so far on beta. Really cool addition. Do I think it's strong? Maybe not on this row. I think they should maybe put Heart on Soul of the Forest and get rid of Soul of the Forest, or put something else back here, some kind of CC. I'm not really sure, but pretty good change though. I'm really happy with this overall. Now the only other thing that changed out of this talent tree is Incarnation and the interaction it has with Berserk. So Berserk was added back to our toolkit. If you don't know what Berserk was, essentially it's a mini Incarnation, so it's still a 3-minute cooldown, and you go Berserk for 15 seconds, reducing the cooldown of Mangle, Thrash Growl, and Frenzied Regen by 75%. So when this is popped, you're constantly healing yourself like crazy, and it reduces the cost of Iron Fur by 50%. So during your Berserk window, you now have basically a mini Incarnation anyways, so a nice, good offensive cooldown. I think the cooldown's a little bit long for 3 minutes, but besides the point, you now have a pretty offensive cooldown that you can use baseline, and Galactic Guardian becomes a little bit more viable. I still think Soul of the Forest is shit, especially going into Shadowlands. But Guardian of Berserk, so Incarnation, what it's going to do is it's still going to increase, it's going to do all of those effects. It's going to also be a 30 second like it is typically. And then it's going to cause your Mangle to cleave. We all know this already. And then it's going to increase your maximum health as well. So the 30% maximum health increase is pretty good, which has a little bit more synergy with your mastery now, because the mastery is affecting how much healing you're taking. The health increase isn't as dramatic as it might be on other classes, where sometimes with a higher health, healers might have a harder time topping you off. But in this case, having a higher health pool with the mastery of a Guardian Druid makes Incarnation like a really, really powerful cooldown if you want to take it. I still prefer Incarnation. I like the cooldown. I like the 30-second cooldown, or that it lasts for 30 seconds. But because of Berserk being added, Galactic Guardian becomes a little bit more viable than it has been. So with these changes, I like these changes. I think they're really good. I still think how it's going to work, though, is Blood Frenzy, Earth Warden, and Rend and Tear are still going to be really, really strong, especially Earth Warden and Rend and Tear. I can see arguments for Brambles coming back in, depending on how much haste you're able to stack and build to have Rage Gen. Typically, if you feel like your Rage Gen is low, Blood Frenzy is the play. If you feel like your Rage Generation is fine, Brambles would be then the play. Bristling Fur is not really taken. So it depends on your stat weights. It depends on how the stats are scaling into the level squish. I haven't played around with like dungeons or anything like that on pre-patch. And in beta, because I've like been spending a lot of time leveling and going through dungeons, you kind of have to take it with a grain of salt. How it's going to be at endgame, I can't predict yet. But I think for the end of BFA, I still think Blood Frenzy will be a good choice. Earth Warden and Rend and Tear is still going to be the play. Because of some of these changes with adding Berserk back in, again, this is going to be a little bit more on par with each other, because Guardian Druids now don't require Incarnation to have that cooldown. And Renewal is a good addition as well. So the biggest loss here is the fact that we have to now choose between Ursol's Vortex and Typhoon. But I still think Resto Affinity is probably going to be the play, and probably Mass Entangle or Mighty Bash depending on composition. So I hope that all makes sense. I hope that was a good video. It was totally unscripted. I just finished dinner and I was like, hey, I'm going to talk about some of the changes. So I hope this was relatively insightful. If you did like this video, please hit that like button. I think it's somewhere down below. It looks like this. And obviously subscribe if you'd like to see more content like this. I hope you guys have a great rest of your nights, and I will catch you all in the next one. Take care.